Please stand by. We're about to begin. Good day and welcome to the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse's Promoting Work in Public Housing Employment Service Programs. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Ms. Jean Lynn Powell, General Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy Development and Research at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Before we delve into today's webinar on the role of public housing authorities on supporting job training and placement for their residents, I wanted to provide a brief overview of the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse, or SSRC, which is sponsored by the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation in the Office of Administration for Children and Families, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The SSRC is a virtual portal of research and other resources related to self-sufficiency. It functions as an online community for researchers, practitioners, and other stakeholders interested in self-sufficiency, employment, and family and child well-being. The SSRC's purpose is to disseminate quality research. There are currently over 4,100 items in the library, and new resources are added on a regular basis. The library's materials are organized into 12 topical areas that are listed on the right-hand side of your screen. Users may search by keyword or use filters like topic area, target population, geographic location, or research methodology to browse the collection. Each topical area page also includes relevant federal laws and regulations. On the right side of the webinar platform, you'll notice links to the library, a list of resources authored by today's speakers, related research in the library, and a link to subscribe to the SSRC monthly newsletter. Simply select the title and then click the Browse To button for those links to open in a new window. I am with the Office of Policy Development and Research, PD&R, which serves as the Department of Housing and Urban Development's policy and research arm. PD&R performs policy analysis, research, surveys, studies, and evaluations, both short and long-term, to assist the Secretary and other HUD principal staff to make informed decisions. Check out our dissemination website at www.huduser.org. Not only will you find our latest research reports, but also newsletters, major housing data sets, and GIS mapping applications. Here's an overview of PD&R's 5 major offices. The Office of Economic Affairs provides economic information, analyses, and policy recommendations to the department's principal staff. OEA analyzes the economic effect of HUD's proposals and other federal regulatory and legislative proposals, directs surveys of national housing markets, and provides recommendations for HUD policy and program analyses. The Office of Research, Evaluation, and Monitoring manages contracts for research and evaluation on HUD programs and other issues relevant to HUD's mission, conducts in-house research and evaluation studies, analyzes HUD administrative data and other data to monitor program performance, and makes available to outside researchers data on the characteristics of HUD programs as public use files. The Office of Policy Development engages in policy analysis, policy development, research and data analysis, and dissemination of policy and research findings. In addition, OPD analyzes legislative proposals, develops legislative initiatives, interprets statutory guidance, and prepares regulatory guidance. The Office of University Partnerships is committed to helping institutions of higher education expand their role and effectiveness in addressing community development needs. Most recently, it administers PD&R's Research Partnerships Program to provide funding for unsolicited research proposals. Finally, the Office of International and Philanthropic Innovation supports HUD's efforts to find new solutions to align ideas and resources by performing research, developing networks, and facilitating collaboration of key partners that include foreign governments, foundations, and philanthropies. Our presenters for today's webinar are experts in their fields who will discuss their work on recent housing initiatives and their impact on promoting job training and placement among public housing residents. My colleague at HUD is Calvin Johnson, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Research Evaluation and Monitoring in PD&R. Calvin will speak about PD&R's evaluations and demonstrations, as well as data on tenant characteristics. Ron Ashford, also a HUD colleague, is the Director of Public Housing Supportive Services in the Office of Public and Indian Housing. His office is responsible for all grant programs related to public housing resident self-sufficiency. Ron will discuss the Jobs Plus program and how this fits within broader supportive program efforts to promote self-sufficiency. Following Ron is Sue Popkin, both Director of the Urban Institute's program on neighborhoods and youth development and a Senior Fellow in the Metropolitan Housing and Communities Policy Center. As the Principal Investigator, Sue will discuss her research on the Chicago Family Case Management Demonstration and the Housing Opportunity and Services Together, or HOST program. After Sue is Michelle Wood, Project Director and Principal Associate at Abt Associates. She will share results from HUD's Family Self-Sufficiency Program, both the retrospective and prospective studies. Next up will be Nandita Verma, Senior Associate at MDRC. Nandita will share her insights as she has led a number of workforce development-related evaluations and co-authored the final evaluation report on the Jobs Plus demonstration. She will discuss the current national FSS evaluation. And to wrap up, Carol Norris, a Vice President with ICF and a practitioner with over 2 decades of housing and community development experience, will frame the key lessons learned and facilitate the audience Q&A. You may submit questions to our speakers at any time through the question and answer feature at the bottom right side of the webinar platform. Questions will be answered after the presentations. If we do not get to all questions, the responses will be posted to the SSRC following the event with other webinar materials. Please note that we will not be accepting questions over the phone or by Twitter, so please use the box on the right for question submission. And finally, we encourage you to join today's conversation on Twitter using the SSRC webinar hashtag displayed on the screen. Tweets using the hashtag will display on the left side of the webinar platform. And with that, I will now turn it over to Calvin Johnson, who will speak about HUD's program evaluations and demonstrations on resident self-sufficiency.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be presenting on this webinar. I think it's a really important topic, and it's timely for us because we have a portfolio of work we are currently doing and will be doing fairly soon. So first I just want to retread for a minute and go over the overview of our Policy and Development Office. Specifically, to highlight that the family self-sufficiency work is done within the Office of Research Evaluation and Monitoring with support from our other offices. I also want to highlight something that Jean mentioned about university partnerships, the office there, because it is the place where we receive a lot of requests or we receive unsolicited proposals to do self-sufficiency work, which is important and a point that I want to restate. It is how we work with universities and our research partners to expand the portfolio of work where we match. We have a 50% match requirement, so we're able to get more of that work done. And then the Office of International and Philanthropic Innovation is important because they do a lot of working with the philanthropic community, trying to expand our resources in that area, but also looking at international perspectives, trying to figure out whether we can learn from other countries and think about creative things that they're doing. Now, I want to turn to the history of self-sufficiency evaluations here at HUD. HUD has more than 20 years of doing this type of work, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but I will talk about some that aren't mentioned here, some of which we're not funding, or at least one of which we're not funding. Talk about ROSS, which is Resident Opportunities and Self-Sufficiency Grant Program, which attempts to reduce and or eliminate the need for public assistance, thus making progress towards achieving economic independence. And in this case, with a focus on elderly and the disabled resident communities. Then we have Hope 6 and Choice, which looks at positive incentives for residents to build self-sufficiency and provide comprehensive services to empower residents. And then you'll hear more about HOST, but a really exciting program where there are a collection of interventions attempting to address barriers to family self-sufficiency, as well as to provide support to families and their at-risk kids. I'm going to move to the next slide here and jump right into a snapshot of HUD's residents and households. So there are a lot of numbers on this slide, and I want to be mindful that it's a lot going on, and we can spend a lot of time on one slide. So I've highlighted the key points, and I just want to kind of mention those key points for you. So the first is, if we look at race ethnicity, more than 60% of residents are female across the board, whether it's our public housing stock or our multifamily stock. 60% of the residents are females. More than half of the residents are black, non-Hispanic. And when we see white, non-Hispanic residents, we see that a greater share of them are in the multifamily stock than in the public housing and voucher stock. So where they actually appear in the multifamily stock. Now I want to shift to the bottom side of this chart and look at work age. So work age is actually defined as ages 18 through 55. And specifically 40% of the public housing and housing choice voucher residents are in prime work age. That is, they're between the ages of 18 and 55. And then if you increase that to age 65, we actually increase the actual percent from 40 to around 50% of the residents being ages 18 to 65. We move to the next slide. And I played around with some of these age pyramids and specifically wanted to look to see how that distribution looked. And what we see here is that if we were to focus on prime age, you see there that a greater share of the males in this figure aren't in the prime work age. They start off at a very early age, representing a pretty good share of those early childhood ages, but then by the time they get to prime work age, they're not there, and they're there in small numbers. However, when we look at females, slightly more than 5% of female residents are actually represented in each of those prime work age categories. And then if we look beyond the prime work age categories, there's symmetry with respect to females and males. You see that beyond age 55, it looks to be the same on both sides of the chart. And the next slide, if we look at the next one, we see that it's the same pattern for black residents. And you see that there are even more black male residents in the early childhood ages. And then even fewer in that prime work age. And if you go to Hispanics, the next slide, you see a very similar trend. You see that males are represented more so in those early ages than in the latter ages. But females throughout will represent about 5% in each of those categories. They are distributed fairly consistently between those prime work age categories, somewhere around 5 to 7%. And then if you go to the white non-Hispanic chart, you see that something totally different shows up. So it's a different and interesting pattern. Haven't given much thought to it other than the fact that we see that most of the representation for this group beyond the early childhood ages are actually above the prime work age. So we see a lot more seniors within these categories probably. But haven't given much thought to this one, but would be interested in hearing what folks' reactions are. So then when we go to households, we shift and go to households. We see that 75% of the households have heads of households that are female. And that 50% of the household heads are black. A pretty interesting finding here is that 45% of household heads in the multifamily housing stock are actually white. That's a pretty interesting finding. So when we find them in the multifamily stock. When we now shift to prime work age, we see that for prime work age head of household, that 60 to 67% are in this category. So 60 to 67% of the public housing and voucher stock head of household residents are actually in the prime work age category. More than half of those in the prime work age category have kids ages 12 or younger, and about 30% of those in the prime work age category, again looking at public housing and housing choice voucher side, have kids ages 0 to 5, which is a pretty interesting finding, which basically points to the need that if we're going to be working on self-sufficiency issues, we have to be thinking about the entire family, especially given there's kids. Now, if we move to the next slide, one of the first things that I want to say here is that the average income across the board hovers around the poverty level. It hovers around the poverty level. Key point here is that 40% of those in public housing are earning their wages, are actually earning their wages, or sorry, earning their income, or most of the household income is actually from wages. And if we look at the multifamily stock, we see that more than half of the household income is coming from pensions. So, you know, there are folk who are working and appear to have work and, you know, to stretch this a little bit, are capable and willing to work. So I think that, you know, going beyond the numbers, I think that you know, the actual perception that folk don't work who actually are being assisted, it just doesn't show up here. We shift to the next slide, looking at the largest source, largest source of income. We see that the largest sources of income first would be pension, followed by wages. But then if we shift to the next slide, and particularly what I want to do is I want to focus on the right side of the slide, where it's kind of blue. And there's one point that I want to make, and it's something that, you know, I've been given some thought to, and I talked to some folk internally about, and that is in the extremely low income group, so that is 30% AMI, that the primary source of income, the leading source of income for the household, no matter which housing stock, whether you're in the public housing, whether you have voucher, whether you're in the multifamily housing stock, the leading source of income there is from pension. And so one of the things that it says to me is that there are some opportunities perhaps to think about whether there are things that we should be doing with seniors, and whether we can be more creative about our self-sufficiency activities so that we kind of figure out whether there is an opportunity to expand some of our efforts to include seniors. So at this point, I want to shift focus and turn over the presentation to Ron Ashford, who is the Director of our Public Housing Supportive Services Division.
Great. Thank you very much, Calvin. Let me just say those are fascinating slides and fascinating demographics. It really helped me looking through them. And with regard to the point about the elderly, today's webinar focuses on, you know, jobs programs and jobs-related programs. There are programs that do deal with the elderly. The Ross program allows for the selection of elderly service coordinators, and there is an elderly disabled service coordinator program in public housing. But again, today's focus is on work and folks between the ages of, let's say, 18 and 64 or 55, depending upon your definition. So I want to talk about the Jobs Plus program. It's a program that is not new to HUD, but it is the first time that we have funding for the program. Jobs Plus came about through MDRC, the Ford Foundation, and HUD had a pilot program in the late 1900s. And at that point, there were 5 housing authorities that had Jobs Plus programs. And what they did was they had an experimental site and a control site. And a lot of different things went into the experimental site. And the control site was just like the norm. And lo and behold, they found out that 4 years later, people in the experimental site worked more. So HUD received money to start a Jobs Plus program. We had a notice of funding availability on the streets, due date December 17th. We are now in the process of looking through the applications, and sometime this spring we will be making 8 awards to housing authorities across the country. We did receive money from Congress for another round, and we will be having another round of applications probably in the middle of the year, and there's discussions about having more money in 2016. So this is a program that we hope will have some legs to it. The Jobs Plus model has 3 core elements, and the first one are employment-related services, think job training, career support, resume writing, etc. I'll talk about that a little more. Financial incentives, and the last category is community support for work. So those are the 3 legs, if you will, of the core elements. Going into the program, the eligible applicants were housing authorities that had a development where there were more than 250 work-age people in it, and that 50% of them were unemployed. So we had a list of about 150 developments across the country that filled that slot, and those were the ones that were eligible to apply. The population to be served, again, public housing residents, and the Jobs Plus program has to be offered to everyone in that development. People can turn it down, but it must be offered to everyone in the development. A grantee can say, you know, I'm going to offer it to everyone, but I really want to focus on female heads of household. I really want to focus on, you know, youth age 18 to 24. You can target a certain population, but A, you must offer it to everyone, and you must give us a rationale as to why you are offering it to this group as opposed to another. Next slide, I'm sorry, I should be telling you this. The first leg, if you will, or the core element, is the employment, and within the employment part, you can think of what that is. It's career exploration. It's job training. It's resume writing skills. It's the soft skills. Obviously, housing authorities don't have expertise in this area, and we don't necessarily expect housing authorities to have expertise in this area. But there is an entity in all communities that does have experience, and that's the One-Stop Career Center, the Workforce Investment Board. And so what we have put into the application, and actually Congress said when they gave us the money, they said that this program should be coordinated with the Workforce Investment Board. So as part of the threshold criteria to apply for a Jobs Plus grant, you must have a memorandum of understanding with the local One-Stop Career Center. That's a must. They're the ones who know the job market. They are the ones with the job developers. They're the ones who know about the job training programs. So that's a linkage that must be in every Jobs Plus program. The second core element is what we're calling the Jobs Plus EID, which is the income disregard. So there is an income disregard in public housing in general, and that income disregard is that the first year, if you're starting to work, you can disregard that income as it relates to having to pay more rent. So it can be held harmless for the first year and half of the second year. But what we're saying in Jobs Plus is that if someone takes a job, the rent will stay at that beginning rent for the whole 4 years, so that a person will be able to accumulate some money, and it's an incentive as opposed to a disincentive. So that is a big part of Jobs Plus. The last core element is the community support for work. And community support for work is something that we don't necessarily say it has to be this or it has to be that. It's how you get the community, that public housing development, to support work. And it can be, think of residents coming together and saying, okay, you're going to work, we will pick your child up from school. We will have a carpool. You have a night job, we will have daycare for you, so don't worry, we will take care of your child at night. It's things that residents in that community do to help support work. So again, different housing authorities, different grantees are going to come in with different ideas about what that community support for work is, but it is an important element of the program. We would hope that when the grant ends in 4 years, let's say 6, 7 years from now, that development will still be about work, and a large reason will be because of the community support for work, that you will have built it into the culture of that particular development. The MOU, again, we've said that you must come in with a memorandum of understanding with the local workforce investment board. Obviously, there are other agencies in the community that you should be working with. We are not requiring an MOU from them, but you must come in with a memorandum of understanding with the local workforce investment board. Partnerships, again, partnerships, you really should come in with partnerships. We're not just saying what partnerships those should be, but off the top, I would say the community college, the local board of education, the TANF agency, maybe the child support agency, all these partnerships you should have. The program does require a 25% match. It's an in-kind match, so that you would talk to the Board of Ed and say, Board of Ed, can you do GED classes, and by the way, what's the cost of that? And the cost of that could be, $1,000 per person, and that would be your match. But again, partnerships are very important, and there's a requirement for a 25% in-kind match. So again, we don't have a preferred program model. We sent out the notice of funding availability. We're in the process of reading applications right now, and we are seeing housing authorities propose different models. We will make the selections in the spring, and we will be putting out another application sometime during the course of the year. MDRC, I mentioned at the beginning that MDRC actually ran the trial, the pilot, back in the late 1990s. They have a website, and you'll see it here, www.mdrc.org/jobsplus, where you can go and read about what happened during their pilot program and what their results were. And they also, by the way, are doing something for the program participants that we select, so that they will be able to learn from what took place in the late 1990s. So that's the Jobs Plus program. Please feel free to contact me later if you want to hear more about it. And at this point, I am turning it over to Sue Popkin, who is one of my favorite people who works at Urban Institute. Sue Popkin.
Oh, wow, that was a very nice introduction. And you're same for people at HUD, Ron. So I'm going to talk about the host demonstration, and actually Ron's presentation is a great lead-in because it's another example of using housing as a platform for services. It is different in that it's really intended to target the most vulnerable households in the development, so not necessarily those who are work-ready, in fact, probably those who need a lot of help to get there. And so that's one of our families right there. HOST was created. It builds on research we had done previously here at the Urban Institute with the Chicago Housing Authority. The Chicago Family Case Management Demonstration was a project that we started in response to problems that the Chicago Housing Authority was running into toward about middle of their plan for transformation when they were tearing down all of their public housing. And they were finding there was a group of people they didn't know how to relocate, who were just had too many issues, too many challenges, and that the service model that they had in place was not sufficient to meet them. And so they agreed to do this research demonstration, which ended up being a partnership of the Urban Institute, the Housing Authority, and Heartland Alliance that provided the services, along with a couple of foundations that provided extra funding to allow Heartland to create a more intensive service model. The 400 families who were in the demonstration got intensive family case management with low caseloads, about 25-to-1 for families. They got access to a transitional jobs program. They got clinical mental health services. They also got access to some financial literacy counseling and, I think importantly, enhanced relocation counseling. And it was surprisingly successful. I had been tracking residents as they went through the rest of the regular relocation process, and they weren't doing very well, particularly in terms of their health and relocation outcomes. and I didn't expect this more troubled group to do very well either. In fact, I thought they'd probably do worse, and actually they ended up looking about the same as everybody else in terms of relocation. They did relocate successfully. They ended up with stable housing. Big surprise with the transitional surprise and the supports, they got big employment gains, and their mental and physical health stabilized, and in fact their mental health improved significantly. But at the end of the demonstration, one of the big concerns was that the kids were not looking good. We thought with the parents' mental health improving that the kids' mental health would improve as well, and that's not in fact what happened. They still looked very distressed at the end of the demonstration. And just to stop for a minute and show you the change in employment here from 2007 to 2009. So we have self-reported employment on the left and the Illinois Department of Employment Security on the right. And you'll see that it increased over time, and even more exciting when we went back in 2011, which isn't in this chart, that employment gain had still held. So I started talking to Mary Howard, who's the Director of Resident Services at the Chicago Housing Authority, about what could we do that would build on what we learned and would get to the kids. And we were lucky enough at that point, the Open Society Foundation had been talking to HUD for a while, and they were trying to figure out what they could do that would support HUD in learning about housing as a platform and would inform choice neighborhoods. But they found out they couldn't give the money to HUD. And they called me up and said, do you have any ideas? And that is how we got to the host demonstration, really trying to develop a whole family model for residents in public housing. Host has been running now since the beginning of 2011. And it uses housing as a platform to provide comprehensive services for vulnerable families, so the families who have more challenges than are not just needing an access to a job or coaching to get a job, who live in public housing or in mixed income. The goal was really to improve the health and well-being of the adults, but really also to see gains for the kids in terms of reducing risky behavior and improving academic outcomes. And there, as you can see on the slide, that is one of our wonderful families in Portland. And that is showing you the first challenge we learned about when we started HOST is that families that live in public housing are big. It's the last source of affordable housing for large families in a lot of places. And so a lot of what we have learned is about the challenge of providing services to serve kids, broadly stated, who, as you can see that picture, come from infancy all the way up to their late teens, early 20s. And figure out an effective service model. There were 3 sites for HOST that were initially, and it has grown since then, but we were in Altgeld Gardens in Chicago, which is Chicago's last remaining large public housing development. We were in 2 mixed income sites in Portland, Oregon with Home Forward, in New Columbia and Humboldt Gardens, and in Washington, D.C. we are working in Benning Terrace. And those are some of our wonderful kids. It is really a 2-generation model, and we have been spending a lot of time thinking about how you get beyond just saying it's 2-generation to make that real, and so that it becomes a situation where the services and the benefits for the parents really are reflecting in benefits for the kids and vice versa. And I think we have been realizing that getting from the language of 2-generation to the reality is another one of those things that's a big challenge. And as I said, one reason is because these are big families with lots of kids of different ages. We really are hoping that the parent and youth participation is mutually reinforcing. And that family from Chicago, you can see the mom and the kids there together. And that mom is bringing her kids out to an event where they were getting certificates. And the little girl on my left it was very funny and told me she had gotten an F in conduct but was doing better in other ways. So she got a certificate for something, I think getting better grades. Really a chance to have the parents recognize their kids' achievements and get the parents celebrated and engaged at the same time. And the common element, much like Jobs Plus, this is not a program where we've said, go do exactly this. It's a framework, and the sites all had different models that were intended to fit the needs of their population. As you can see in that photo, for example, in Portland, it's a very diverse population. It's a lot of immigrants. They have a lot of different needs than families in Altgeld Gardens and Benning Terrace who are living in historically distressed communities. But common elements across the sites were the intensive case management was a little bit higher than in the original demonstration, 1 to 30. Tailored and integrated 2-generation services so that there was a case manager who knew the whole family, who had the time to pay attention to what the kids needed, and knew how to plug both parents and adults into the services that they needed. A lot of coordination, collaboration, and leveraging of services that were already there, like the Workforce Investment Board in Portland, for example. I think very important is they were using a strengths-based coaching approach. We didn't want this to be one more intervention where a social worker came in and told people what was wrong with them, or a property manager told them they were not lease compliant and therefore we're going to have to do something. It really was trying to engage families where they were and helping them move toward their goals. The services also included clinical mental health, workforce development, and then an array of youth services, a lot of out-of-school time activities. And I think one example of meeting people where they are is one of the women in Portland told me that initially under her old case management, people just told her, go get a job, that's what you have to do. But when hosts started and she started to have time with the case manager to think about what she wanted, she was able to say, well, what I want to do is get my GED and maybe go to college so I can get a good job and really help support my family. And when we actually talked to her, she'd not only gotten the GED, she'd gotten her associate's degree and was about to start that job in January. So that's what we were really hoping we would get to. I'm going to focus in on what happened, though, in the employment in Chicago, which was really they really tried in Chicago to build on the first demonstration that we did and use their administrative data to target the people who needed the most help. So they targeted families who were not in compliance with their lease agreement, meaning that they weren't either working for pay, they weren't exempt from work, they weren't in school, and they weren't volunteering. And it was a somewhat imperfect model. A few people actually were working, but we found it worked pretty well for picking up the families who really weren't engaging. The interventions they had were an on-site job development team that directed clients to trainings, to job fairs. They were serving 180 adults, and they did have some summer youth programs like Learn and Earn. There also was both sites actually had a community garden where there were jobs for older youth. Just to tell you what Portland did, they also had a job development. They also built host on their FSS program and another program called Innovative Changes, so they had an IDA account attached to what people were doing. They also had summer youth programming. DC hasn't really started its employment programming yet, which is why I'm not focusing on them here. So we were really pleased. We didn't know what was going to happen in Chicago. In Elgeld particularly, people hadn't engaged with services for a long time. And actually, employment went up, and it stayed up across the course of the demonstration. So there seems to have been some effect on self-sufficiency. Still, obviously, a lot of people in and out of the labor market and struggling, but some benefits. What you can't see in this chart is people really took up the clinical mental health services. In fact, they had to bring other providers on site, and they were really pleased with that, and we're hoping that that will have some long-term benefits for these households. We have been doing, just to tell you a little bit about what we do at the Urban Institute, we're doing mixed methods research evaluation. We have an outcome evaluation where we are doing baseline and follow-up surveys of the families. But we also, as you just saw in the slide, the employment data slide, that data came from the site. That's program data we asked them to collect and give to us. And we've gotten administrative data from the housing authorities as well. We have done a lot of formative evaluation, process evaluation. We have met with the providers regularly. We have given them feedback. We are not coming back 5 years later and telling them what worked and what didn't. We're really engaged on the ground. We've spent a lot of time talking to the program participants, to the adults and the youth, and monitoring what's been going on. So it really is a feedback loop for real-time learning. And this is intended to be, like Jobs Plus, this is something that's supposed to inform policy. It's supposed to, I told you it was created to help HUD with choice and thinking about housing as a platform. So we didn't want this to be another evaluation that sits on a shelf. We really hope that we're demonstrating that intensive dual generation or whole family approaches can improve the life chances for the vulnerable families who live in who depend on public and assisted housing, really. We also are hoping in the long run that this may help promote the health of the community overall, especially if we can get to the kids and reduce the risky behavior. And we're looking at how to determine the feasibility of this kind of the feasibility and sustainability of doing this kind of comprehensive service model in public and assisted housing. The systems impact we've seen so far, CHA has already rolled out a sort of lighter version of the model to all their public and assisted housing properties. They now are going to have a youth service partner at all sites. We're working with them on a follow-on that's going to target very young children, which we weren't really able to do in the first 3 years of the demonstration. My favorite quote from Home Forward was my partner saying there's no going back to a single generation model. And in fact, in their most recent Hope 6 site, they undertook a capital campaign and built a wonderful early childhood center on the property that is also going to include services for the parents for employment. And then I think the DCHA has really been perhaps the closest model to what would be applicable to a lot of people in the field. They'd never done anything like this before. They didn't have a lot of resident services before. And really helping them learn to get to where Ron was talking about with Jobs Plus, to be an effective partner, to do the kind of contracting that's required, to get the kind of MOUs in place, to be able to monitor the service provider and make sure they're doing what they've asked them to do, and to develop the kind of performance management data system to be able to monitor the services has taken a while, but I think it's really starting to pay off, and it's very exciting to see hosts come together there. And now I'm going to stop and turn this over to Michelle Wood, who's going to talk about FSS and family self-sufficiency, and is my former colleague.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Sue. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. Just one sec here. How are you? Move to the next one. So the Family Self-Sufficiency Program is one of HUD's long-standing and well-established programs. The program was established back in 1990 to help residents of public housing and participants in the Housing Choice Voucher Program become self-sufficient through education, training, case management, and other kinds of supportive services. Family self-sufficiency programs are administered by public housing agencies, and families who volunteer to participate in FSS sign a 5-year contract of participation with the PHA, and that contract specifies steps that the family and the PHA will take to move the family toward economic independence. And there are 3 primary components of the Family Self-Sufficiency Program: the escrow account, case management, and referral to supportive services. The escrow account offers families the opportunity to save money and an incentive to increase earned income. The escrow balance is established when the participant's earned income increases, resulting in increases in the tenant's monthly contribution to rent. An escrow credit, calculated by the PHA based on increases in earned income, is deposited into interest-bearing accounts managed by the PHA. So I'm going to talk today about 2 studies that HUD sponsored to examine outcomes and FSS operations. The first is a retrospective study that was completed in 2004 by researchers at Westat. And the HUD published findings from the retrospective study in 2004. The study analyzed HUD administrative data covering a time period from 1996 to 2000. And one objective of the study was to describe FSS participants and the size and scope of FSS programs as of that time. The study found that most FSS program participants were single mothers between the ages of 25 and 44. The median annual income for participants as of that time was, as of 2000, was $12,000. And more than half, 55% of FSS participants were employed. In terms of educational attainment, nearly half, or 47%, of FSS participants had a high school diploma, and nearly 1/3 had some post-secondary education, and 22% had less than a high school education. Another objective of the retrospective study was to examine outcomes for FSS participants. And what the study found was that FSS participants experienced increased income over a 4-year observation period, and also increased in earned income from work. The study also found that the median escrow disbursement for those who graduated from the Family Self-Sufficiency Program was just over $3,300. Now, this study was not designed and carried out as a randomized controlled trial, but the study did compare outcomes for FSS participants to a comparison group of similar families who were not participating in FSS. And the study found that increases in income over the study period were higher for the participants than they were for non-participants, and also that increases in earned income were higher for the FSS participants. So now I'm going to move on and talk a bit about the prospective study. The prospective study HUD sponsored, and HUD had published findings from this study in 2011. This study focused just on the housing choice voucher component of family self-sufficiency, and the study was carried out by a research team from Planmatics and Abt Associates. The objectives of the study were to describe program features in a representative sample of 100 housing authorities that were operating family self-sufficiency for housing choice voucher participants. Another objective was to study outcomes for a sample of new enrollees in family self-sufficiency, and these enrollees were tracked over a 4-year period of time. The study used data provided by program staff on site at the family self-sufficiency programs, both program coordinators and case managers, and the study also used data from HUD administrative systems. Information on the outcomes and the participation experiences of the tracking sample came primarily from the case managers who were working with each of the families. The tracking group consisted of 181 enrollees in family self-sufficiency from 14 different programs. These families enrolled in 2005, and at the time of enrollment, the average age was 34. Average annual income in 2005 was just over $16,000, and 71% of the tracking sample was working, on average 32 hours per week, earning about $11 per hour. And 3/4 of the tracking sample were high school graduates. And then if we look 4 years later, what we found that 24% of these families who enrolled had actually completed all of the required components of family self-sufficiency and graduated. Another 37% had left the program but hadn't completed the requirements. They exited without graduating. And 39% were still enrolled in family self-sufficiency when the study period was concluded. Now I'd like to talk a bit about the graduates. And for the graduates, I think one of the big things to point out is the escrow accumulation among this group. The group of graduates participated in family self-sufficiency for an average of 28 months. And at that time, 35 of them had accumulated savings in the escrow account. The average escrow balance at the time of graduation was nearly $5,300. Most of the graduates were employed at the time they entered the program and remained steadily employed throughout their course of participating in the program. 6 were not employed at the time they enrolled, but were steadily employed thereafter. And the other notable thing is that graduates of FSS saw a substantial increase in annual income their peers in family self-sufficiency. Their income increased by 60 escrow balance. So now the next slide just shows some more information about how the graduates compared to non-graduates and those still enrolled when the study ended. In general, the graduates in the tracking sample had higher incomes than non-graduates at program entry and exit. They were mostly employed throughout their tenure in FSS, and graduates spent more time in FSS, on average about 4 months longer than those who exited without graduating. And the table just highlights some of the key differences. I wanted to point out that a higher percentage of graduates had schooling beyond high school, and that the graduates had higher income both at program entry and at graduation, just reflecting that increase over time. The next slide just summarizes the escrow balance. Now, the folks who graduated receive the escrow balance when they complete the components of the program and graduate, and that average escrow account was just under $5,300 for that group. exiters had an average of over $2,000 in the escrow account when they exited the program. They, of course, did not receive the escrow balance. And the still enrolled also had a balance of just over $3,500. Those who were still enrolled, many may have gone on to complete the program and to receive their escrow balance. So in the next slide, we also looked at the tracking sample to learn a little bit more about why those who exited had left. And we found that almost half left because they had not complied with some of the rules or requirements of the program. Another 29% left family self-sufficiency voluntarily, and others left for other reasons. Some poured it out, about 10% poured it out. There were 6% left the program because their income had increased. So in the next slide, I just wanted to talk a bit about some of the lessons from the prospective study. The study found that the family self-sufficiency at the time in 2005 was well established and very stable in the sample of 100 programs. The study also confirmed the basic model for serving participants, with case management provided by PHA staff and with referrals to outside programs for other types of services. The study also found that case management was fairly intensive. In most cases, case managers met at least quarterly and some even more frequently with FSS participants. In fact, in the tracking sites, 43% of programs said that case managers met monthly or more with their FSS participants. We did find in this study that the caseload sizes varied quite a bit in the tracking sample, and this may have affected the intensity of case management that was provided. So finally, both the retrospective and the prospective study provided some important information, particularly about the really substantial opportunity for savings that the Family Self-Sufficiency Program offers families through the escrow account. The prospective study gave some important insight about graduates of the program who spent longer in the program, had higher incomes when they enrolled, were more likely to be employed, and had more years of schooling. The prospective study also included an exploratory multivariate analysis of graduation, but this did not reveal significant impacts or effects of program characteristics and graduation when controlling for both types of characteristics. So overall, this study and the retrospective study provide a wealth of information about descriptive information about the program and program outcomes, but more questions remain about the effects of family self-sufficiency. So I'm going to turn it over now to Nandita Verma from MDRC, and she's going to discuss a couple of studies of family self-sufficiency that are using a random assignment model to examine effects of the program.
Thank you, Michelle. That was a terrific introduction to the study that I'm going to describe right now. It is an evaluation of the FSS program that's currently underway. And the study is sponsored by HUD. So you can think of this as a third in a series of studies funded by HUD on the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. The study targets recipients of housing choice vouchers, and so it focuses on households who receive vouchers, and so the study does not include public housing residents. And this is a national evaluation, and our evaluation team includes folks from MDRC, Branch Associates, M. Davis, and experts, those who understand housing policy and research. So just by way of policy context and sort of building off Michelle's presentation on the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, we know that FSS is probably the nation's main work-focused program for housing choice voucher recipients. And Michelle has described the FSS program and how it's structured around two main components. Essentially, there's the case management component and there's an escrow component. And together, the program is geared towards increasing employment and earnings of households and also helping them build assets. while there's a lot of rich descriptive information about the characteristics of who participates in FSS and some of their circumstances during the course of their participation or at exit from the program, there is less evidence about what works to help voucher recipients achieve these goals. In other words, do we know whether the program is effective? There is one study that's currently underway in New York City. It's called the Work Rewards Program. This is being conducted by MDRC. We're about 4 years into the evaluation, and so far the evidence that's coming out from that evaluation is kind of mixed in terms of the program's effect on employment and earnings outcomes. In 2012, HUD funded an evaluation, a national evaluation, to look more specifically at this question of, whether FSS is effective. And the study uses a random assignment design. So we're at a very early stage of this evaluation, so we don't have numbers or findings, but I would like to use my time essentially to describe the study, what some of the goals of the research are, and what we might be able to see and when. So the evaluation is a comprehensive evaluation, and it's structured around 3 major research components. While the evaluation is focused on understanding the effects of the FSS program and answer the question whether FSS makes a difference, it's also equally important to understand how programs are implemented, both the operations aspect and how participants experience the program. So there is an implementation and a qualitative research component to the evaluation. And as Michelle has mentioned, FSS is more of a framework. Housing authorities receive funding to implement FSS, but it could play out differently in different contexts, depending on funding availability and other factors. So the implementation research will help us sort of capture the operational aspects and the program participation experiences of those who are in the study. The program impacts component, as I mentioned, is sort of central to the study. We're not only interested in understanding overall whether the FSS program is effective, it's equally important to understand for whom. So the subgroup story, whether some portion of those who participate in the evaluation or in FSS respond better or more positively to the program, is a central question that we'll be looking into. There's also a benefit cost component to the study, and via this lens we'll be looking at both the economic gains and losses of operating FSS, and we'll be looking at this from various perspectives. So there are a whole series of questions that we're interested in. They're both qualitative components and quantitative components, and so the study is structured around and will draw on a variety of data sources, and I'm just going to list out some of the data sources that we're going to use. At the time of study enrollment, we collect some baseline information, and that's really important to describe who enrolled in the study. We also will have access to HUD 50058 records. These are the records that are maintained by the housing agencies and include information on household composition, changes to income, and escrow accumulation. We will also collect wage records, particularly following the employment and earnings of study participants over the study period. By partnering with our housing agencies and getting access to some of their program data, we'll be able to understand program participation as well. So the types of case management services received, the type of engagement with case managers, and referrals and so on. We also will be conducting at least 2 surveys with study participants, and we understand there are a range of outcomes that we're interested in documenting and assessing impacts on, and to get those type of data, we need to go beyond some of the administrative records that are available. And so we'll be conducting a couple of surveys. And the evaluation will also include site observations and interviews with participants and staff. So very quickly about just the timeline for the study. As I mentioned, it was funded in 2012. over 2012 and 2013, we identified 18 housing authorities who agreed to participate in this evaluation. Over 2013 and 2014, we focused on the study enrollment of study participants, and by, I think, at the end of December 2014, we had enrolled the entire sample of 2,600 plus study participants. And through 2018, which is when the study will end, we'll be focused on tracking, analysis, and producing some reports. So very quickly, this map shows you where our 18 study partners are located. So you'll see from this map that, there is a spatial distribution over here, and we are working with a mix of housing authorities, I would say, from very large housing authorities that operate very large FSS programs to some smaller housing authorities that operate relatively smaller FSS programs. But we have partners around the country, and just moving on. So the study, random assignment is central to the design of the study, and I just wanted to use this chart to sort of illustrate the process of random assignment. And random assignment is being used in the case of the study mainly because we want to answer this question about, is FSS effective? And to answer that type of a question, you essentially want to compare the experiences of those who experience FSS, who are enrolled in FSS, to those who are not enrolled in FSS. So all the housing authority partners in this evaluation introduced or integrated the random assignment step into their enrollment procedures, and MDRC worked with each housing authority to integrate that particular step. And it worked like this. FSS is a voluntary program, and so individuals who are interested in FSS either attended an orientation session or a one-on-one meeting where they heard more about FSS and about the evaluation and agreed to participate in the evaluation. And during this orientation session, they were also informed about their chance of being in one group or the other and what it means to be in an evaluation study. So, and once individuals are assigned to one group or the other, then essentially the evaluation tracks their outcomes over time. So there is an extended follow-up period. And, I just wanted to use this chart again to sort of illustrate the value of the control group. As I mentioned, this is an impact analysis. We're looking to speak to this question of, is the program effective? And what the control group essentially does in this case is sort of help us understand the experiences of those who do not receive the program. And in this case, since we're interested in the FSS program, by studying the experiences of the control group, we understand how the control group fares in the absence of participating in the FSS program. And I'll just focus on on the chart to the left, where it essentially shows the percent ever employed over a 48-month period. And I'm pulled this illustration from another MDRC study, and you see that the control group employment rate over this period was close to 61%, 60.5, and the program group's experience during the same period was 62.5%. So both groups show fairly high levels of employment, which is impressive, but when you compare these two groups, you see that the difference is much smaller and the difference is not statistically significant. Okay, so I just wanted to use this to illustrate how the control group gets used, the analysis in the context of the analysis. So very briefly, I selected a few characteristics of the individuals who participated in the FSS evaluation. This is across all 18 housing authorities, and the sample is largely female. And you'll see that close to 70% of the households are receiving FSS at the time, food stamps at the time that they enrolled in the study, and we have a mix of both short-term and long-term voucher recipients. Once we have access to national HUD data, we'll be able to compare the characteristics of those who are in the sample with the characteristics of the larger population, just to speak to this question of representation. So that's work that we're going to be doing down the road. Again, at the time that individuals enrolled in the study, we asked them the question as part of the baseline information form, reasons why they enrolled in FSS. And I think what's interesting over here is that finding work or looking for better work is an important driver for enrollment in FSS. Their reasons for engagement in FSS are broader than that. Building savings and home ownership is a big driver. And part of this could be just in terms of how the program is marketed by a particular program, but it also could reflect what the individuals are interested in at that moment. So very quickly, just to wrap up, I'll mention that now that we have the study sample enrolled, over the next few years we're going to be collecting data, developing a deeper understanding of the programs, and conducting analyses. We have a series of reports that will be released, and the final report will be released in September 2018. We're also in the process of looking at the longer-term impact from the work rewards evaluation. So far we have data through 4 years, and we will have the last installment of the longitudinal tracking data to look at this year. We're also starting to think about other ways in which subsidized housing can be used as a platform for employment. We have some evidence out there. There's some evidence that's based on the voucher population. There's some evidence that's based on those who live in public housing. And we're sort of thinking about ways in which strategies or program models that can be used to sort of result in bigger effects and broader success. And there's the beginning of a model sort of that's developed, and it's a model that we've developed in collaboration with a Boston-based organization called the Citizens Women's Union, and we're also in discussions with the Boston Housing Authority about testing this model in that context. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to turn it over to Carol Norris, who's with ICF.
Hello, everybody. We have about 15 minutes, and we have a number of questions that have been asked, and I'll go through them in somewhat the order in which they were received. But first, I wanted to say a couple of things about what I think happened today, which is very exciting, and that is that we're learning that housing is continuing to be used as a platform for job training and job searches, and that we're continuing to learn from the FSS program and expanding on it. It's not a static program. It's being used. It's changing, and that HUD is very, very interested in the lessons learned as we go along. So I thought that was very exciting. I want to make sure that everybody remembers that HUD and HHS are partnered on the SSRC Clearinghouse, and it is the place where you can find the most current information about the FSS program, about the Jobs Plus program, and about the host program, all of which are very, very interesting. I think we learned that for some people on the line who are not in public housing, that the lessons learned in the FSS program and the Jobs Plus program can be used in other housing, in all of the assisted housing, that housing continues to be a great platform for, job searches. And I think that we learned some really good information about the importance of partnerships. So continuing to build those partnerships that a public housing facility cannot be all things to all people, and that the partnerships with the professionals who understand the job market are incredibly important to the success of these programs. I'm going to start with some questions, and the questions coming in, the first set of questions were about the data. So I'm going to push those over to you, Ron, on the data. And we have a question that says, is the age distribution of HUD-assisted residents on the slides reflective of only the head of household or of all residents in public housing?
Sorry, we missed the
Ron?
question. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The age distribution
Yes.
of the assisted residents
Yes.
in the slides, is it reflective of head of household or of all household?
All household residents.
All household members. Okay. And then we had a question that said, do you believe that the black, no Hispanic males are missing in the later years due to the high incarceration of this population, or do we have data regarding that?
So, do I believe it and whether we have data are two different things, but I do believe that there are currently practices that have not been supported by HUD, and there have been letters that have been sent out from the Secretary, the Assistant Secretary, and the FHA Commissioner highlighting factors that would exclude someone from being residents of assisted housing, and those things are the only two things as it relates to crime that would exclude them. However, I do believe that there are practices at the Housing Authority that eliminate far too many household members who otherwise would be housed because of the discretion that the housing authorities have with respect to who can and cannot be on a lease, beyond the two exclusionary factors set out by the HUD leadership.
Yeah, interesting.
But that's only one factor. I think that there are some other factors as well. There are some challenges, but I do think that crime and the exclusion based on criminal records or criminal history is a significant one.
Yeah, thank you. In your slides, you referred, did anyone else have something to say about this? I heard someone trying to come in. Did anyone else want to comment of the speakers? Okay, then we'll move on. In your slides, you refer to pension. Is that Social Security income or some other kind of income, and do you know?
Well, I mean, I think that as good as we can get as the data, so when I think about pension, I think that it could potentially, we don't have a way of teasing it out, but it could potentially be Social Security. We don't have a way of identifying the various categories that are basically disentangling the various categories within pension. But I would suspect that some of that is there as well.
Is Social Security?
Yep.
Yeah. Moving on, we had a question about the Jobs Plus program, and the question was, are there any future plans? We had several questions that had to do with the Jobs Plus program and the future of the Jobs Plus program. Was there any future plans to extend the Jobs Plus program to participants of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, specifically housing authorities with moving to work flexibility, where there is a hard, whoops, I lost my question. Well, we can answer that. And then there was a subsequent question that said, oh, here we go. And then there was a subsequent question that asked, was there any thought to extending the Jobs Plus program to project-based voucher programs, to the project-based voucher program?
Okay, so the Jobs Plus program is by its nature a place-based enterprise, because what you're doing, particularly when you look at the community support for work, that's why it worked so well in the late 1990s, where you had residents in a particular place supporting each other in terms of going to work. So the funds that were given to HUD to run this program said public housing. So because it said public housing residents to be assisted, we cannot then go to HCV residents. There is a question because there is RAD happening, and is it possible that a housing authority today is a public housing and next year is a RAD development. It's the same public housing development, except one is public housing, one is RAD. Will they be able to continue the Jobs Plus program? At this point, they would not be able to, but it might be that that could change. And it might be in the future that a project-based development would be eligible for Jobs Plus, but right now they are not.
Right. We did have a follow-on question about the RAD program and wondering whether public housing authorities that are going to be participating in or moving toward the RAD program could still use the family self-sufficiency escrow account, since that would be considered income.
So I think that question has a couple of different elements to it. Right now, if you have a public housing development and it becomes a RAD development, but you have either FSS money or ROS money, you do not have to end the program and therefore have the person forfeit their escrow account. They are grandfathered in. However, if a RAD development applies for a ROS program or for an FSS coordinator, they would not be able to, because again, it's public housing, and the only way it reaches to RAD is if it's grandfathered in. So I hope that answers that question.
You know, the person who asked it, if you want to follow up, just send in another question, and I think we have enough time. I can probably get to it. We had just following on, given that the congressional language prevents extending the Jobs Plus program to the tenant-based, to the Housing Choice Voucher program or to a project-based voucher program, is there any thought to introducing such a program under that name or another name under separate legislation?
I really can't speak to the legislation. However, in my mind, this is just Ron talking, this is not necessarily HUD talking, I have questions whether the program would work for housing choice vouchers folks who are spread throughout a locality. Because again, it's place-based, you want people to come together, you want to have that child care co-op to take care of people's kids when you go to work on the night shift. You want to have a carpool. You want to have all these things that are really place-based. So I'm not sure it would work in a housing choice voucher setting. It could very well work in a project-based setting. So that would be my answer there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of interest in the program itself and how it could be extended, and maybe it's a different model, but clearly there are folks that are very interested in finding ways to offer job training and job placement services to people who are participating in their Housing Choice Voucher program.
Yes, yes.
Moving on to our some of the studies. One question says, it appears that many of the families that are being studied are that many of the families participating in public housing are three generation. Why is the study focusing on two generation? Also, is there any information about whether some of the whether we have adult children living with elderly or disabled parents that are being looked at as well?
I assume that's a question for me. So, yes, a number of you are absolutely right. A lot of the households are multi-generation, especially in Portland, where there were a lot of immigrant families and multiple adults in the household. We use the label two-generation, frankly, because that's what the field is calling it. And so it sort of Aspen Ascend has a two-generation network, but really I would describe what we're doing as a whole family approach. Yes, there definitely are adults living with elderly relatives and younger disabled families. There was a family in Portland, the last people I spoke to, where the father had kidney failure and a heart condition. There was and there was a nonverbal autistic child in the household. So I think that is a major issue across the generations in public housing. I mean, there's a reason people are living in public and assisted housing. They need it.
Yeah. I'm afraid that we're getting down to our last few minutes, and I probably have time for one more question. I did want to remind everyone who's on the call that any questions that you sent in that didn't get answered on the call will be answered on the website, and so you will get a response. And I wanted to ask a question here. And this is a question that I had as well, being very interested in financial literacy and financial empowerment. How many of these programs partner with Assets for Independence program in their areas? Do we have any information about that? The HHS program, Abt Assets for Independence?
I don't know if Host partnered with that specific program, but the Portland program was partnering with Innovative Changes, which is an asset-based program, and that helps people have individual development accounts. It's a little different than FSS. And financial literacy
it is a little different, and it's a wonderful program if other people want to look at it. I think that we're going to have to conclude with that question. And I just want to once again thank our speakers. I hope everybody got a lot of information out of this. Remember that the information will be posted on the website and please use the SSRC website for all the information that's there. It's exciting to know that these programs continue and that they continue to change and they continue to learn from from the research that's being done. Did anyone else have any concluding statements? Well, thank you all, and look forward to the next webinar.
This concludes today's conference. Thank you for your participation.